Hi, everyone. Welcome to Omega Male. It looks like we have a intimate group tonight, which is, always nice. We can talk and have little discussions. I'm Taylor. I would be your moderator tonight. I also work for WeDeepen. It's great. You are live on Facebook at the moment, and you are being recorded. So you can keep your camera off if you'd like, but if you would like to join and talk in the discussion, we prefer to have that on for you. You can comment down below and answer any questions. I will have that to Dan and, I can't talk. I'll hand that off to Dan and he'll be able to get a little chat going and hopefully we get some really good conversations going. And yeah, if you want to tag your Instagram name so we can all join after and maybe be a part of this WeDeepen community with Omega Male, that'd be fantastic. Your guide today is Dan Mackenzie. He's a podcast host. He's a writer, a personal counselor whose work is rooted in anthroposophy and nonviolent communication. He's known in the Los Angeles area for stimulating vital conversations at social gatherings and clubs where he also performs because he is an Emmy-nominated singer and songwriter. Dan is also the host of his own podcast known as Omega Male, which is where this title comes from. And he continues to work on his book, which is also known as Omega Male. And today's title and topic is Male Privilege, Patriarchy, and Feminism for Men. And I won't go into it too far because Dan will explain it, but this is him. And welcome.
Thanks, Taylor. Another wonderful introduction from you. And I want to say thanks to all the WeDeepen people, Christina, David, Kelly, Taylor. You guys are doing really great work. I have to say, almost as a caveat, I feel there's a really unhealthy, insidious kind of dehumanizing process that we're all going through in terms of this massive amount of technology-related communication that's sort of been forced upon us in the COVID era, and I think that it's important actually to counterbalance that influence by using the technology in ways that actually foster deeper human connections and creative sharing and that kind of thing. And in a way, there's almost maybe even a redemption of that dehumanizing force possible. So WeDeepen is, I see it as a platform dedicated to that kind of work and using the technology in that really conscious way. And so I'm grateful to be part of that. Thank you for including me on the platform. Thank you also to all of you attending. This is a really wonderful group of people. I got a chance to peek at who's here, and there's some really old dear friends and really new friends and some unfamiliar faces, and I'm just honored that all of you are joining. So yes, indeed, I am working on a book and a podcast, both called Omega Male, both dealing with these men's issues of our time. And so how this particular project plays into that is that it's, selfishly speaking, it's sort of my way of having the opportunity to kind of toss my ideas, to trot them out, ideas that I'm working with on the book, and see how they land and learn how to speak about them. But at the same time, hopefully, especially by inviting both men and women and really anyone into this conversation that's normally reserved for men or men's groups, I'm hoping to stimulate conversations that could be important, if not at least interesting, or maybe contribute in some way to our cultural evolution. So that's the overall dual motivation. And the specific Omega Male concept is, if I can put it in a nutshell, a kind of communal envisioning of a future ideals for men, a new paradigm of masculinity. What would the most spiritually evolved, balanced, integrated men of the future look like? And I guess I say look like, but I'm talking about inner transformation. And how do we strive toward that ideal? And so the questions I've been asking myself, which I'm also asking other men to ask themselves and others to chime in on, are very basically, who and what am I? Who and what do I want to become? Who and what do I have the potential to become? And how do I get there? And I guess there's some presumptions that are implied there, which I do actually take as givens. One, that we have the power as human beings to govern our own spiritual self-evolution, both as individuals and I think to some degree collectively. And two, that part of that process, that process includes learning to develop the capacity to kind of reprogram our inherited social and cultural inclinations and preferences, and also to kind of transcend, or at least harness, transmute, kind of redirect the biological influences that we're also subject to as men and women, and kind of not be governed by those. So I guess that's a lot. We do have, so there's a presentational element that's me talking for about 10 minutes and sharing some of these ideas. And then I have two really wonderful guests that I'll sort of introduce along the way, one by one. And then there'll be kind of like an open forum segment, or at least where people will be welcome to chime in. And so we have some rules of engagement for that portion. If we can put those up on the screen. I don't see them, but I see that there's screen sharing happening. There they are. Very basically, be cool. That just means try not to interrupt others, try not to talk over them, try to be mindful of how long you're going on for, or if you're sharing a lot more than somebody else who might be trying to get in a word. Be kind, very straightforward. You can be passionate, challenge other people's views, challenge my views. Just please don't insult or attack anyone. Be bold. This is more of a warm encouragement to anyone who feels a little self-conscious or hesitant about sharing. Even though we're all in the comfort of our own homes, this is sort of a form of public speaking. I get it. These things make me a little nervous, but we can all plow through it, because I think there's real value in sharing. So please know that this is a warm space, if not a safe one. So there's that. I want to, there's going to be some guests coming along, but first of all, let me kind of introduce the specific topic tonight. So tonight's theme, as Taylor mentioned, is like a 3-in-1. It's patriarchy, male privilege, and feminism for men. This sounds, I know, like a college course that you might not want to take. It's just a lot to bite off for a 90-minute segment. How are we possibly going to do that? Why would I put all these three into one thing? And basically, it's because to me, these are inextricably linked. So the simplest way of explaining that is, I would say patriarchy is the paradigm we've inherited. Male privilege is the collection of advantages bequeathed upon men within that paradigm. And feminism is at least one powerful way in which men can join women in seeking to, I guess you can't heal a paradigm, in seeking to change or replace the old paradigm, and thereby endeavor to neutralize the privilege. So these things belong together. We're not going to cover nearly all the terrain that we possibly could. And I know that even that introduction itself sounds incredibly academic. I want to get away from that. There is so much intellectual argument over stuff like patriarchy and male privilege. It's very polarizing, right? There's an argument as to whether or not is this a patriarchy? Some people think it is, some people don't. People have different degrees of severity when they're talking about what patriarchy is. Some people would describe it as a system in which men have a kind of primacy in the realms of land ownership and government and moral authority. And other people would go so far as to say that patriarchy is a system wherein men oppress and dominate and exploit women. So there's not a clear agreement on what it is. There's not a clear agreement on what its origins are. Some people feel that patriarchy is nature's way, actually. The apologists would say that it's rooted in our biological differences, and it's quite natural because men are stronger and women bear children. And there's other people that sort of call bullshit on that and say, well, they may be in the minority, but there are actually matriarchies in the world, even today. And this is true, mostly little tribal ones, but in places like Ghana, Indonesia, parts of China, Kenya, I think even in Costa Rica, there are some matriarchal societies. So it sort of flies in the face of that theory. Not to get into my own views yet, but I would probably say it's irrelevant to what degree the system is intrinsic to our biological differences, because as I said earlier, I believe that we a crucial part of our evolution is to learn to transcend those and not be ruled by them. But there's also even people who argue that in prehistory, like sort of up until 3000 BC, I believe Gloria Steinem was one of the people that sort of supported this theory, that matriarchy was actually the predominant form of society for human beings, and that there was a shift around then. And of course, there are other people who think that you can't substantiate that, or it's not true, or so on and on and on and on go the academic arguments about this. And I don't want to go any further down that rabbit hole because like I said, it's like everything else nowadays, very polarizing, kind of boring ultimately. And also, I'm not an expert academically in these fields. In fact, I feel that as a man, there's no way I can really understand patriarchy as fully and as viscerally as a woman can, and I never will be able to, any more than as a white person I can really understand what racism is compared to like a black person in this country. But I am, having said that, I am a man who is endeavoring to understand and grapple with these things, and also to sort of help other men grapple with them. So I kind of want to just boil it down a little bit and try to dig into what our reality is in the world now. And so the first blanket statement I'll make is, regardless of what you want to call it or where it comes from, systemic gender inequality is real. Taylor, I'm glad you're screen sharing because I want to bring up that first image we talked about. I want to know, and feel free to unmute yourself if you really know the answer to this. Does anybody know who this person is? Didn't think so. I didn't know who this person was until a few days ago. This person is Victoria Woodhull, and she is the very first woman who ever ran for president of the United States back in 1872. She's an incredibly compelling person if you just read her Wikipedia page. Why did we not learn about her?
Wow.
And yes, she was running for president of the United States in 1872, which is half a century before women even had the right to vote. And her party was called the Equal Rights Party. And she nominated as her running mate Frederick Douglass, a black abolitionist. So this woman was badass. I feel like we should know about her. We can take her picture down now. And so here we are, some 200 plus years later, 45-ish presidents into the game, and we still have not had a single female president, right? So anyone who thinks that patriarchy isn't real, that's just one little sliver, and there's 1,000 ways to look at this, and we're going to look at a few of them, and I'm just going to popcorn a few things in there along the way. But that's just one wake-up call, but it's also a reminder that the old paradigm is cracking. In the next 10 days, we will be inaugurating the first female vice president, not just a woman, but a woman of color, which is a really exciting and I think powerful sign that things are changing. But the patriarchy in the old paradigm, or whatever we want to call it, is fighting and resisting. And women have been hammering away at this old system for centuries now. And I think maybe because men are likely to be more complacent in a system that has generally favored them, men haven't entirely been on board. You could say that we're lagging behind in the paradigm shift. And yet another thing I want to say definitively, as sort of stake my claim here, is that the patriarchy, the old paradigm, not only is bad for women, but in the long run is bad for men too, because men are gradually evolving. We're different than we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and 1,000 years ago. And patriarchy is imposing these very antiquated forms and notions about masculinity on men that men are grappling with and are in real trouble with. And so this is a moment, I believe, that these cracks are going to turn into breaks, and we have the opportunity to really replace this paradigm. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but men are being called to rise, to join women, and everyone is being called to kind of join the evolution, you could say. And or else, be swept away in the tsunami. I think there's going to be some upheaval for years to come, and maybe decades, as patriarchy sort of gets dismantled. But I will go on, but I maybe should stop there and kind of introduce my first guest, who's kind of going to be a sounding board for me tonight. David Shenk is a brilliant, quite popular and successful author of 6 books, ranging in topics from the Grateful Dead to chess to, he wrote the definitive book on Alzheimer's, a book on epigenetics that I read recently. He's just a brilliant guy. He's a smart guy. And what I particularly like about him, well, aside from that, he's now somewhat infuriatingly also an incredible songwriter that I've been working with. David, you're just too damn smart. But he's a smart guy, and he's kind of a bullhorn for his beliefs in terms of using social media as an activist. So I'm happy to have David join me. David, what do you have to say to what I've said so far? How do you want to chime in?
I think you should just keep saying how smart I am, because that's going to be better than anything that I can say. Let's see. First of all, it's funny that you just mentioned Victoria Woodhull. I need to confirm this when I have a free minute, but I think I actually knew her granddaughter or great-granddaughter, who was a very prominent journalist who died way too young, but she was she ran a foundation, media foundation, when I had a fellowship many years ago. Nancy Woodhull, who was one of the founders of USA Today, and she was a badass. So she was tough. Yeah, exactly. I didn't particularly like her, honestly, but she was tough, and boy did she get things done. So now that I've spoken ill of the dead, and we've established how brilliant I am, which just means that I know how to ask questions. So Dan, here's my question. Here's my first question. I know you don't want to, obviously, we're not going to venture into politics and just all the craziness that's happening right now. Our country has figuratively been turned upside down, and we may or may not be in a cold becoming hot civil war. People are dying, all that. But it does bring something to relief, which is this, which I think we have to deal with in this space, which is that you've done a lot of thinking on this issue. There's going to be some other people in this space tonight who have done some thinking and will have great questions. I venture to say everyone we are talking to tonight will be enlightened on one level or another. They'll either know a lot, or they'll either know what they don't know and be asking smart questions, and they'll be open to what you're saying, and we'll all be open to what we're all saying. And that's great. We're all doing the right thing, hopefully. But what do we do about the fact that no matter what we do, as we've realized so well in the last 4 years, but particularly in the last week and several weeks, what do we do about the fact that we're surrounded by people who they have no interest in being enlightened about this or anything else? And so who are we talking to? Are we really only talking to ourselves, and that's just the best that we can do? Are we trying to find a language about this topic that you're about patriarchy and the other things you talked about, where it actually could somehow become a message that could spread out into a room of people who aren't like the people in this room now, who are already, quasi enlightened? Does that make sense, that question?
I think it does. I've been waiting for weeks and weeks to say this thing that I read on a mug somewhere, which is, I reject your premise. No, it's a good question, and it's actually, I think, phrased slightly differently. It's a question that I hold. The part that I'm sort of somewhat facetiously rejecting is that there's a group of people, I don't know what your words were, who don't want to evolve in some way. You know what I mean? I don't want to misquote you, but the essence of, like, there was something about the othering in that question where I think lies a big part of the problem. And I understand the feeling, and I understand the perception. A friend of mine, just who I respect very dearly, uploaded a quote today that was, and I forgot who the celebrated person was who said it, but it was something to the effect of, I'm tired of, talking about, unity with these people. We need, the rest of us need to unify against them. And that speaks very much to the increasing polarization that's happened in our country in every realm. And I understand the temptation, and that this is particularly strong among liberals, because people who identify with liberal sort of progressive values imagine, and perhaps not unjustifiably, that they are better educated or are more worldly or are more aware of, usually more on the right side of history. There's a lot of reasons for people who are embracing these kind of ideas, including an evolved masculinity. I'm sure this would be regarded as a very iffy kind of liberal, namby-pamby thing by a lot of conservatives. So I understand where you're coming from. And yet I think that's part of the task, is not in some sort of reaching across the aisle, it's the right thing to do sort of way, but in the spirit of rejecting what I think is at the heart of patriarchy, which is dominance hierarchy. I think there's something in the traits that are traditionally considered masculine that is systemically about opposition and competition, and it's a vertical hierarchy. And I'm going to bring this back into the reality of your question. Just bear with me for a second. And so I think sort of the liberal side has its extreme too. And it's the extreme that doesn't want to be in dialogue. So when I see a t-shirt that says the future is female, I mean, I sort of loved seeing that on a little girl, but at the same time, I kind of disagree. I think a more accurate t-shirt would be the future is more feminine, because a future that's female is going to be just as bad as a past that's male. And so I think we need to, as part of this sort of evolving integrated masculinity, we need to go from a competitive, oppositional disposition to a collaborative, cooperative, conciliatory, embracing disposition. And I know that's hard because we're encountering ideas that we find are, and we're not only encountering ideas on the quote other side that we find disgusting in some ways, but we're also encountering a force that is not conciliatory at all. So it is a valid question and it's a valid challenge, but I think ultimately coming from a place of love and a desire to be unified will help. And if you look at Sarah Silverman's show, where she went out and specifically went to a bunch of conservative households to meet people in person and talk to them about her gay friends, there's a lot of beautiful things that happen there. So I think she's leading by example. And I think that would be one way into following a woman's example into how to integrate that kind of energy into this seemingly hopeless polarity that we now are facing.
Can I butt in real quick of David? Can
Yes.
Turn your, put yourself in the middle of the frame. If you could just tilt your screen so that you become in the middle of the frame. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry.
That's the feminine touch, a little bit more viewing experience.
I love it. An aesthetic influence. And the thing is, my hope is that education will influence this change too. We're all watching the same, we're not watching the same news, but we are watching the same entertainment, right? I mean, everyone's got HBO and Netflix, and I have to assume that the red states don't have their own entertainment channels. And so I'm finding that the more I am willing to examine and have conversations, I'm sort of toggling between answering your question further, because I actually, for example, I had a great conversation with my cousin, who's a conservative and also a cop, around the BLM stuff. And just having a talk with him for 2 hours brought us to a real place of common ground. And so I think that can really help. But as I'm becoming more aware of the sort of tendrils and influences of patriarchy everywhere I look, it's popping up even in the entertainment, and it's the entertainment that everybody's watching. For example, just 2 days ago, I watched a documentary about the Go-Go's. Now, I tuned into this documentary because I loved the Go-Go's. I was like I don't know, 11 or 12 or something when they hit the scene, and I loved them just like I loved Madness or the Specials or whatever other male bands I was watching at the time. And so I watched this documentary that hopefully people in red states are watching. And of course, a theme came up, which would not have come up in a police documentary or a Madness documentary, namely the context of what it meant to be an all-female band in the 80s in a male-dominated patriarchal industry. And so that happened in a couple of ways. For one thing, in their marketing, if we can throw this picture up on the screen, the one of the Go-Go's, I'll illustrate the point. Nope, that's not the Go-Go. That ain't the Go-Go's, and there's the Go-Go's. So this is the Go-Go's Rolling Stone album cover when they were at the height of their success. And it was not their idea to dress in underwear for this cover. I think they talk about in the documentary, they felt a little bit hoodwinked because for one thing, it was a female photographer who sort of maybe convinced them that this would be sort of a feminist punky statement to be wearing men's underwear instead of sexy female lingerie. But then they discovered, to their horror, they weren't told what the title was going to be. And so this cover came out, which they already had ambivalent feelings about, and it said the Go-Go's put out. So let's put them in underwear and then slut shame them. And so we can take the picture down now. Their female manager called up the Rolling Stone editor to express their kind of disbelief and anger at this and hoping maybe they could make a change for the next edition or something. And the guy said, oh, I figured you were calling to thank me for the cover. Boom, click, hang out. So, and the Go-Go's, there's other things in there. They were encouraged by men to sell their publishing, which luckily they did not do. They came up against the patriarchy a lot. And we see what happens to women when they do that. What happened to the Dixie Chicks a few years back when they spoke truth to power, that pretty much ruined that band. And incidentally, the Go-Go's are the only all-female band in rock history who play all their instruments and had a #1 album. They put out 4 albums. They've been on and off for years, and they've never been inducted or invited into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So as Stuart Copeland, the Police drummer, says in the documentary, what the fuck? And yet there's a progression. There's a progression. And when I say the paradigm is cracking, there are more and more women speaking truth to power. And to segue into our next guest, I think the most powerful shakeup that we can point to as proof of that in recent years is the metoo movement. And that's part of what gave rise to the impetus for me to write this book and do this work. It made me aware of a lot of patriarchal fallout and systemic abuse of power and male privilege. And we've all heard the kind of scary firsthand accounts of the sort of Harvey Weinstein and all the literal details about women being assaulted and raped and taken advantage of. But there's an entire other layer that applies to maybe all women in Hollywood. And our next guest can really speak to that, I think. My other dear friend, Megan Dobkin, is not only also a really successful producer here in Hollywood, but she's a really motivated and motivating social organizer. I would even call her an activist. She works most directly with white people for Black Lives. In terms of getting boots on the ground and getting people to actually act in the name of a cause, I've never seen anyone who's her parallel. She's a force of nature. And also she came up during the kind of pre-Me Too era of abuses in Hollywood. And I think her perspective is unique. So Megan, I want to turn it over to you so you can share your experiences and perspectives about that.
Got it. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be in community with you all. This is my first WeDeepen experience, so I agree with you, Dan, that there's something really great about it being used for something other than like leave meeting. Okay, next meeting. So yes, it's great to be here. It's an important subject. It's a ever intersecting subject. And that I think, Dan, you and I spoke about this before the Capitol, so it's even more so now in my head. So yeah, we've heard a lot about. I think everyone, probably all the women on this call, have their stories. That's what the Me Too movement is about. We've read a lot of really heartbreaking things, really terrifying things. But I think what drew me to speak tonight actually was, and when Dan told me a little bit about what he was thinking about talking about, the thing that really landed with me was like the invisible casualties that sort of toxic masculinity culture bore, and what the Me Too movement was at the at our moment of the continuum of trying to lift the veil on that. And again, I came of age as an executive and a producer at Miramax, so I was like right at ground zero of that. But there's that was just the one that got busted. And I think like after the Me Too, I was in an accountability group with a couple female creatives at the time, and we spent probably about a year and a half unpacking the Me Too movement together. And three moments, like three layers of the onion, are kind of my biggest takeaways and my memories. And literally two of those three, I remember being in the car, like talking to one of my friends and just like weeping. And because I came of age and this didn't happen to me. Like everything that I was reading about, everything that I was hearing about, it just didn't happen to me, or so I told myself. And I had hinged like my entire success and ability to navigate these waters on an incredibly useful and well thought out strategy to thwart advances and to make my boundaries clear. And I touted it in many, many rooms with many, many women when we did speak about this issue, which of course we didn't as much as we do now. And I was, like, look, this is what you got to do. Let me guide you on what you got to do. And it was a strategy that dealt with direct communication with the person that was doing this, but also with humor, like being able to really like diffuse the tension and give the shame somewhere to go. So it would sound something like this. It would sound like, are you touching me again? You can't really be touching me again because I told you the last time, remember, that you shouldn't be touching me again. You are touching me again, right? Okay, so what are we gonna do next time? Are we gonna touch me again? No, okay, don't touch me again. All right, good, all right, hug. Like that was kind of what it sounded like. And I was just like, that's the winning combination. That's what you gotta do. And I did it a lot. So the first weeping car fest that I remember was that, like, of course it's fucking happened to me. Like, of course it happened to me. You don't develop a strategy for something that's not happening to you. It's happening to you, And then, like ordinary people, all the thoughts start coming back, all the memories. Like I got pulled into a freaking bathroom and someone asked me to hold his penis while he peed. I didn't do it. I got away. And my survivalism told me it wasn't happening to me because of my strategy, but it happened. So that was layer one, was like, okay, get real, this is happening. And this is like, survival 101, trauma 101. The second layer, which kind of manifested more in anger than like grief and weeping, although it was grief underneath, was like, that was my life force and my energy that I was expending on a daily basis when my male counterparts were passing around naked pictures of actresses that they were about to meet at 3 p.m. and I kind of like had to play it off like, hey, that's cool. I'm one of the guys. I get it. You want to see her tit? I get it. You know, that was life force. That was survivalism. You know, that was like, I'm not supported in this environment. They don't want me at the table. So I better make them feel comfortable, and I better override whatever I'm feeling right now for that. Now I have a whole different like philosophy on disruption now, but at the time when I was still somewhat indoctrinated by that culture, that's what I felt like I needed to do. And damn it, that took a lot of fucking energy to do it. You know, that was energy that was not going to my job. That was energy that was not going to my own strategizing about how I want to move through the world. That wasn't going to art. That wasn't going to supporting the writers and the directors I was working with. That was purely just getting through the day without feeling vulnerable and attacked. So that sucks. That's actually like life force stolen. You know, that's like the invisible shit that perpetuates men just being able to feel comfortable in that kind of environment and at ease when we're actually on the battlefield, like kind of dodging shit. And that's where a lot of our labor is going. I use the word you don't like, Dan, I'm sorry, but it is real. Labor, it is labor. And then the third layer of the onion, which was the second time I cried, was that I began to remember those rooms of women where I touted my own strategy. And I thought about that I must have perpetuated in those rooms. I don't know what those women's situation was. I was so busy projecting my own survivalism that I didn't slow down to think, what positions have they been in? Like, what are they dodging? What are their battlefields like? I had to override it. I was in an override. And I think this one is like the most important because all of us with our identities have the capacity to internalize and to hold up systems that we don't agree with. And I guess that was just really, really on my mind this week, of course, like at the intersection of toxic masculinity and white supremacy, that like couldn't be more apparent now, you know? Like, what harm are we even as like white women who are dealing with feminism? Like, what are we holding up? And as we move forward in feminist work, as we move forward in the fight against domestic terrorism, we have to really look long and hard about how we create accountabilities. We have, you know, some of these concepts I'm still digging into. Things like carceral feminism, I'm still digging into. I'm hoping that the Me Too movement as a national movement can move into something that is about how we make sure that the systems that we are holding for accountability don't actually perpetuate further the oppression of part of our female, you know, a large majority of our female demographic. So anyway, that's a lot to unpack. I think that, you know, my analysis of my own, I've always considered myself a feminist. It wasn't until I started to work with Black Lives Matter via their White Solidarity Partner, which is what White People for Black Lives is. We work directly in accountability with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, and we are part of a larger network of white folks who are working towards dismantling white supremacy culture from within the white community called SURGE, Showing Up for Racial Justice. And David, I have some answers for you about your questions about how we reach people, and that's Surge National's work, and we can get to that later because I've talked quite enough. But it wasn't until I really like committed to a racial analysis that I understood like the breadth of the patriarchal argument. Because again, they're the same, whether it's patriarchy, white supremacy culture, the culture of worshiping productivity over, you know, self-care. It's all the same damn system. It's a system of disposability. And I think I just encourage any white male allies or any male allies, like if you are engaging in these conversations about toxic masculinity, it must also include racial analysis, or else it's an incomplete conversation. That's been my experience of it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Megan. I'm on board with that. When I first began talking about this subject to my most valued living mentor, who's my great uncle, who's literally 99 years old and is a Black former professor of psychology, he immediately guided me into this is a broader conversation about privilege, you know, not just toxic masculinity, because the term that I was starting with was toxic masculinity, and before we'd even moved into patriarchy and male privilege. So what you're saying resonates with me, because you said it's about disposability, and it's about power dynamics, and it's about hierarchy and dominance hierarchy, and those in power wish to retain their power. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so much you shared, and thank you for all of it, for sharing your intimate stories, for sharing your thoughts on those things. And there's so many directions we could go with that. I particularly, with your third layer, really struck me about this challenge of, you know, being in that situation with others. I mean, my mind went to, you know, stories you hear about what the poor people did in concentration camps when pressured. I went to my own, not that these are comparable, I went to what I felt like when I was under the duress of my stepfather with my brothers, and how we were divided and I wasn't there for them in the way that I wanted to be. People who are in extremists often don't have the resources to do what they later wish they would have done. So I think it's very humbling that you're asking yourself that question. And, you know, there's entire documentaries about, like, swaths of women. Who are these women that voted for Donald Trump after this sort of pussy grabbing stuff came out, right? Let alone who are the men. If you watch the documentary, that special on Phyllis Schlafly, it's very interesting to see these two camps of women, you know, one who are sort of still clinging to their own attachment to the patriarchy in a way, and not knowing how to free themselves from it. There's so many dynamics at play, and again, as a man, I'm only beginning to try to understand them. But I wonder if anyone else in the space wants to respond to what Megan shared. I want to open that up for anyone who wants to chime in on that. Don't feel pressured, of course.
I saw some people come in later, like Lauren had jumped in and of come and join the conversation. I did drop in the chat of, like, your intention for being here this evening. So bring your intention for being here this evening into the conversation, so we can unpack that too. So we know why you're in the space this evening.
I want to speak, if does anyone want to pick up on that? At any time anyone really does, feel free to just sort of unmute and chime in and say, I'd like to say something about that, or drop it into the chat. But maybe we can go a little further with what Megan was saying, because your comment about this connection between white supremacy and patriarchy really struck me this past week too, Megan. In fact, if we can, let's throw up the picture of Donald Trump for a second here, just to make the point. So this guy, he gets the sort of, if there's a, you know, male privilege asshole of the century award, it's him, right? I mean, somehow this totally inexperienced non-politician won an election against a woman with a very seriously established political background, who actually won the popular vote. And despite having 20 plus allegations of sexual harassment and rape against him, despite having been caught on tape boasting about how he enjoyed sexually harassing women, somehow this guy made it into the Oval Office. And if we look at how he is now so desperately clinging to power, it's so representative of the most toxic male privilege of all, right? It's my power, so I don't want to give it up. And I'm not going to give it up. And it doesn't care. It's the same it's the same thing as his freaking hairdo, right? The entire world has mocked this guy for this ridiculous thing he does. And yet there's something so deeply entrenched and stubborn. You know what? No, I'm right. And I'm going to stay here. And this is mine, and I'm going to keep it. Can we throw that other guy up on the screen? So as to what happened, I think this guy gets the runner-up for white supremacy / male privilege, or whatever this guy's representing. He happens to not be carrying a Confederate flag like some of his friends, but this guy, right, he's in Nancy Pelosi's office. He's in the office having broken into the Capitol, and he's got his dirty boots kicked up on the desk of one of the most powerful, important women in American politics, if not world politics. And what is he bringing to the table, right? But it's this smug, self-satisfied grin. This guy's not coming with an agenda. He's not a true revolutionary. He's not doing anything but complaining that he doesn't want his guy to lose power. So very specifically, what is this? What is male privilege? I mean, I think I want to just name it a little bit for people for whom this term is a little vague. There's a wonderful thing you can Google called the male privilege checklist. And if you really Google deeply, I wish I'd remembered the article, but as to Megan's point, there's also someone who's taken the male privilege checklist and put that into racial terms, because a lot of what we call male privilege is also linked to being white, cisgendered, heteronormative. So whereas men enjoy certain privileges, it's particularly the white, cisgendered, heteronormative men. And so, yes, those issues are absolutely inextricable on some level. I want to honor what you said about that and reinforce it. But just to sort of summarize, I wrote down some of the things to kind of clarify what that list of male privileges is. So as a man, I'm more likely to be promoted, elected, run a corporation, be a millionaire or a billionaire, have my opinion respected, be paid more for the same job than a person of the opposite sex, to be able to finish my sentence, to get credit for my ideas in a business meeting, to be able to walk alone safely, to be represented fairly and equally in entertainment and media. And I'm also more likely to abandon my spouse and children, should I choose to do so. I am, as a man, less likely to be objectified, domestically abused, intellectually dismissed, mugged, attacked, raped, condescended to, talked over, sexually harassed, shamed for my sexual exploits, to have my driving, my financial choices, or my moods be attributed to my gender, to have my appearance picked apart if I'm a public personality, or to have my reproductive rights legislated by people of the opposite sex. And of course, it goes on and on and on. It's a very long list of privileges, but just to sort of place that into reality, my favorite one is the very last one listed, which is, as a male, I have the privilege of being unaware of my male privilege. I have been trying as an exercise to become more aware of my male privilege. And you're right, Megan, in that endeavor, I can't separate it from my white privilege. But it's a conversation worth having. I don't want to go too far in that direction, because there's a few more things I want to hit, including feminism. But in my own experience, I'm increasingly, not just like, when I watch the Go-Go's documentary, it's like every day something either huge or tiny occurs to me as an example of male privilege. On the huger scale, for example, a friend of mine quite recently who has had an incredible career and has risen sort of despite all of the obstacles, including the patriarchal ones, placed in her way in the entertainment business, has really risen to the higher echelons of the Hollywood entertainment business. And at a time where this promotion that was expected should have been the sort of jewel in the crown of her much lauded career. And by the way, she won many awards for the work done, or not only her own achievements, but achievements on behalf of women. The huge slap in the face was she was passed over in this promotion for a less qualified man, which was kind of disillusioning and heartbreaking for me to watch as her friend, but also, you know, it's a wake-up call, because Hollywood, particularly in the wake of Me Too, is an industry that, you know, purports and claims to sort of be on the forefront of really wanting to change things, and things are not changing very quickly. They are changing, but they're not changing quickly. And then down to just like the most minute things, I've realized over the past, this is something I've been noticing for a while now, for years. Every single time that I pass a woman in a doorway, going in a store, coming out of a store, bumping into someone when I'm not looking, particularly if it was me not looking, immediately and unequivocally and sincerely, a woman will say, "I'm sorry," and just apologize. Could be totally my fault, could be no one's fault, it doesn't matter. And men don't do that. So what is it that's been so deeply ingrained in us that men, you know, kind of, if you bump into a man, they look at you like you were about to fight. And if you bump into a woman, she apologizes. It's like, this privilege is so deeply ingrained, and it comes out in so many different ways. I wonder if anyone wants to speak to that, or David, do you have anywhere you want to go with that? The floor is open. How does it show up in other people's lives? Do any of you men witness this? Do any of you women want to talk about how male privilege affects you?
And hey, my name is Garrett, and I've experienced the same kind of thing, you know, whether it's walking down a hallway, going to stairs, someone else will defer back, kind of give deference. And it's something that I've noticed and do my best to actually try to go out of my way to reciprocate. So it's something that I think just by talking about it and being aware of it is something we can kind of, you know, each of us make a small difference in our daily lives.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to share. I spent most of the last couple of years living in East Africa and Kenya with my partner, who is Kenyan, and I had a new picture of male privilege, and it's something that, you know, as at the age of just turned 20, I had my first daughter, and since I have had 3 more, so I've got a whole gaggle of now adult daughters, and it was just very much a focus in my early years on what they were going to go through in their lives. And then I just, through my men's work, came into spending time in East Africa, where the male privilege is very, very strong. But there's also like suicide amongst men is really high. Substance abuse, really high. The violence, you know, the violence that is committed in pretty much everywhere, but there, you know, it's very strong, was men. You know, I walked 100 miles across part of the country, and a lot of times people said, like, well, isn't that dangerous? I was like, well, like, what do you mean? Well, I said people, and I said, well, what people? Like, men or women? You know, and everyone would laugh when I asked that question. And I'm just kind of bring this up in some ways. It was like, you know, when David was talking, and like this reaching out and this kind of question around male privileges, I have so much privilege, and I recognize that, and yet I see men with so much privilege who can't see the privilege because of, you know, and almost as though there's a burden around this privilege. Like, I actually don't know how to handle, because life is a challenge, no matter who you are, whether you're male or female or black or white, there are challenges. And that if my life is hard, then I can't actually have compassion for someone else. And then how alienating is that? How almost unhuman is that to not have compassion? I mean, compassion is so human. So there's like this alienating quality. And so I've just kind of seeing that. And the reason why I brought in this kind of story of living in Kenya was when I saw this privilege, yet also seeing, you know, this unnatural split between which gender was the addicts, which gender was committing suicide, and then which gender ultimately laughed the most, and it wasn't the men. And so I just kind of bring up this, you know, for me, this piece of really, how is this privilege playing out? Because there's no question that we have a privilege, and then there's just something within that's so toxic for men. And so kind of like reaching out to me has been this matter of, how do I actually empathize without condoning, or how do I actually condemn certain actions while also empathizing? So that way I'm not in this sort of very masculine thing that I see very often, which is not empathizing, even if it's something that's horrific.
Yeah, thanks. That's heavy. There's something sort of traditionally masculine just about, you know, deciding who's right and who's wrong and condemning the wrong, and, you know, and so much that we're being called to rise to has to do with these things that are traditionally considered feminine, which is empathy and understanding and being willing to see something from someone's point of view that's not your own. And we just have so much growth in that area. And it is, you know, I do agree with you that there's some kind of balance in there. There's some kind of magic, and it's so facile almost to say, well, coming from love. I don't want to move into sort of spiritual bypass territory, because I don't think it's easy to just come from a loving place, right? I think that's actually that's work. And so in a weird way, I was going to talk about, you know, feminism and what I mean when I say that I'm a feminist, you know. But I think part of being a feminist or being an advocate for the change of the paradigm means also having compassion for the men and showing up for the men. You know, I think of the situation in Rwanda. A friend of mine did some work down there with nonviolent communication. And as most of us know, that this is an area where there was a real genocide of one group of people against another. And yet they had to continue living in this country together. Matthew, you might know more about this than I do, having spent time in Africa. But my understanding is that the justice system was so overwhelmed with so many murders and trying to process in the aftermath, that a new form of justice as an alternative to retributive justice, restorative justice, was sort of experimentally tried out in communities because they just couldn't simply prosecute all these people. And so what that meant was that in these communities, the men who had committed murders and various atrocities were tried by their community. And instead of looking for a punishment for them, they participated in finding ways to find some sort of restitution and reintegration. And so things happened where, for example, this one very moving example I heard of, where a man who had killed two of another woman's children committed to working for her for the rest of his life. And so you have this dynamic where a woman is basically living in proximity and working daily with a man who killed her children. And what kind of capacity is it that this woman was able to summon to form this kind of bond with this man? And what kind of capacity arose in this community for this kind of redemption to happen? And I think these are really extreme examples, but it plays into what we're being called upon to tap into in terms of an entirely different approach. Because I think the change of the paradigm doesn't just mean that women get to sit at the same table where the men have always been, or that they get to have the same amount of property or the same opportunities. I mean, of course, there's these externals around opportunities that women need to have, but the entire system, it seems to me, needs to be dismantled, because the forces and the beliefs that have been holding it up and the structures that are in place, and yes, these dominance hierarchies are what's toxic, and they're just equally toxic, no matter if men and women or even people of different races are getting the same chunk to eat. A system that is competitive and scarcity driven. Something my great uncle, the mentor I mentioned earlier, said in our conversation today in a different context, but it struck me as being applicable here, is that the sort of old paradigm, there are two ways of looking at the world. He wasn't talking about it in the sense of patriarchy, but I think it applies here. To me, patriarchy in the old system represents the human delusion of being separate. And so we suffer in these separate bodies, this delusion of being separate. And so as a separate entity, it's me against the world. And a spirituality and a spiritual sense of the world, and maybe a feminine, not female, but a feminine understanding of the world and of community and of our oneness, can lead to an inner recognition of our connection to each other. And if so, if we build systems that are based on not communism, but communal spirit, and the recognition of our belonging to communal spirit, then maybe those kind of magical transformations and shifts that were possible in Rwanda in such a real way will be possible to kind of start introducing into our own communities. So we're not just on the brink of the civil war that David was talking about. David, does that sort of, anyone else jump in there?
Yeah, me. Yeah, I just want to mention, we don't need to wait, it's here.
Yeah.
The people who are holding this conversation is the movement for Black Lives. And that's why I say that, like, there is no separating these things. Because the idea of understanding that even the dude with the dirty boots in Pelosi's office, he is being used, but it is not, this is not a poor and working class movement, the Trump movement. That is like the biggest problem that I myself, as someone who lives on the coast, have had to unlearn, that that demographic is actually suffering very deeply. And that's when the breeding ground for white supremacy and Proud Boys misogyny and all that stuff is just like gets exponentially more able to be exploited. But they actually, and if you read movement leaders' responses this week, it's not that they're not calling for accountability, they are. But along with that comes organizing them, comes meeting their needs, comes like budgetarily manifesting more success for them, more balance, mental health facilities, drug addiction services, education, infrastructure, job creation. That's what the movement for Black Lives is interested in seeing for these people that like are flying the Confederate flag in the Capitol. And that's what the work with Southern, like breaking up the Southern strategy and their Southern Crossroads project from Surge, that's all a strategy to help that vision. So, restorative culture, that is restorative culture. That is, whatever you want to call it, abolition, whatever version of it you want to say. The idea of meeting people's needs instead of disposing of them has already landed and has been developed already. It's just a matter of us mobilizing behind it and throwing everything we have behind it.
A lot to unpack there too. I'm sort of deciding which direction to go there. To what was it Garrett said before? I can't remember what the gentleman said about, what can men do to kind of see. The reason I invited Megan and David particularly is that I feel like we're a triangle of different approaches. and what Megan just very eloquently stated was, as I expected, because you so inhabit this role, Megan, this sort of boots on the ground, here's what can be done, here's what's already happening. And that is really powerful. And I love the way that White People for Black Lives works, is if you join this organization, you connect yourself even. There's almost daily emails that are just sort of like in very friendly suggestions. Here's how you can show up. And that's powerful because it helps us to have guidance in terms of our activism. It's not that different from like the move on stuff that happened a decade or so ago. If you have these kinds of values, here's what you can do. And David, who has been uncharacteristically silent for the last 20 minutes, but who I introduced as a bullhorn, David is very powerful in the realm of stating your truth fearlessly and unapologetically, and I think calling people to speak out. Some of his posts literally are like, you need to speak out on this if you believe it. And so the part of the triangle that I'm most active in, and that this, for me, this is about, because I have to somehow make this about me again, but seriously speaking, is about the inner work that's involved. And as I understand it, and there's many aspects to it. One of the things it's been occurring to me more and more is, because it's like one thing to sort of get a philosophy like Megan's talking about and like have an aha moment or whatever, but to really change the way we think and process the world, it requires an inner transformation, and epiphanies are helpful, but there's real work. And there's one thing that I want to call the diet. What's to think about what your diet is, not just food wise, but spiritually, what's your diet? I started looking at friends of mine and comparing friends of mine who were maybe more attached to the sort of the old world masculinity, patriarchal paradigm, and clinging to that and finding excuses for it and scoffing at the idea of male privilege. And I found in my observing them, because I knew several people very well, I found that many of these men only listened to music with male singers. And so I started, trying to extrapolate from that a little bit more. Everyone knows about the chick flicks versus, action films or whatever, right? There's a lot of very heavy-handed entertainment bias in terms of entertainment being geared towards one gender or another. And obviously we have these political information silos that sort of gear information towards one political predisposition or another. But it goes with the male-female stuff, it goes a lot deeper, to ask yourself as a man, how many of the last 5 to 10 books that you've read were written by women? How many of your close friends are women? And there's sort of a list of things like this that we can ask ourselves, because I realize that it's kind of it's your spiritual diet has to do with what you're taking in from the world. So if you're only listening to music literally sung by men, sung from their perspectives, and you're only reading books written by men, and most of your dear friends are men, so most of the earnest conversations you're having are with men, you're likely to be stuck in a decidedly male perspective. And it turns out that the men that I sort of considered more balanced, sort of progressive, many present company included here on this call, and it's not everything, but it's a big part of it. So I think one thing that we can become aware of in terms of the inner work is reaching for a balanced diet if we don't have one already. And what that affects for me, if that's coupled with sort of the inner work of deep meditation, it allows us a space where we become becoming more aware of the male privilege and the broader perspectives. We are certain inner vistas open up where we are able to kind of reflect on our own history and things we've done and things we've said and thoughts we've had and patterns we've inherited. And it's painful, And it's an ugly process, you know? I mean, to this day, I still have realizations about either moments in my past or even things that I do now that are insensitive in some way or another, and reflective of male privilege, or even a little bit of toxic masculinity. But that inner work of being willing to peel your own onion and look at your ugly shit, I think is really important. I know that people like Matthew, who's also shared earlier in his men's work, is engaged in that kind of thing.
I think
hope
Nick
that
had a
resonates.
question too.
Yeah. What was that, Tyler?
Nick had a question that he wanted to bring up.
Who did? Please. Nicholas, come chime in. Please do.
Yeah, so it wasn't so much a question, but there's things that bounce around. Bear with me for a moment. So there's an interesting idea that I came across a while ago that I summarize as there's a lot of things that are social mechanisms, social coping mechanisms for things that we've gradually been solving through technology. And so one of the ways that that comes across, which is the first time I raised my hand, with regards to, like you said, you know, like we're not separate. And if I'm sitting here maintaining pretty strict social isolation for months and months and months, like there's a degree of separation there, and that comes into there are social coping mechanisms for biological safety. And there's a degree to which there's a theory that xenophobia comes from mixing the diseases that come from mixing populations before we had modern medicine. And when I take that same frame and thinking about, okay, what are our social coping mechanisms for mental health and emotional health, and how does that relate to these sorts of healing processes that you're talking about, and like reaching out, you know, like what Megan was talking about with Black Lives Matters wants for the Confederate flag waving seditious rioter, and those sorts of those concepts. And then, you know, what I've also been thinking a lot in terms of, as I grow my emotional means, what is that, how does that relate to this concept? And what you were just now saying rings true, that how can I, and I'm forgetting the previous words that you used because it did my spiel, but it ties into how do I grow myself so that I have the capacity to do these things? And what are our social coping mechanisms that I don't need anymore because we've got better ones involving like mental health and the study of psychology?
Yeah, I mean, I think thanks for sharing that. That's a real affirmation for me. And, you know, just that willingness to want to, I mean, my main takeaway here is a sort of crystallized vision of what a multi-pronged situation and approach we have here. You know, there's not just one answer to this vast systemic problem, right? We have the question that Megan raised of how can I really be an ally when I don't really have the perspective. It's hard to even, as Matthew said, have empathy either for women in a certain situation or for men who are, as David also raised, toxic, you know, and there's a lot of challenges, both external and inner. And again, for me, the focus is usually the inner work. But I think, you know, what you're expressing, Nicholas, is like this willingness. And that to me is so crucial. And it's something that you can't just begin with, you have to sort of keep renewing it. Like, you know, every time I get to a sort of more self-congratulatory space, like, oh, I've evolved so much in this regard, I sort of run into a wall. Like this happened recently. Like, I think part of what I'm recognizing about male privilege is that just because I imagine or I really am an ally, it doesn't mean that that I can't make a serious misstep. For example, I'm so like, I feel like I'm such like an enlightened guy that I sometimes will joke about, like, mock these guys who aren't, you know, and another guy can sort of get that, you know, guys will pretend, you know, mock misogyny in a way, and we all sort of get what we're saying. But I was, you know, hanging out with my partner the other day, and we were talking about the new Wonder Woman movie. And it was like, we were talking about whether we were going to watch it or not. She said, you know, I kind of heard that some mixed reviews and maybe it sucks, but I really want to watch it because it was, just done and directed and created all by women. And then I just thinking I was being a comedian. I was like, well, is that why it sucks? And I was like mocking the misogynist dude, but she was like, not funny, like, I know who you are and I know you don't mean that, but like even making a joke about that, like that's a painful area if you've grown up as a woman, that there might be people who think that way, and that I might actually be sort of perpetuating a thought form even by mocking it. And then the funny thing was we did end up watching the movie, and I'll say this, there were things about the dialogue that I thought were a little cheesy or whatever, but I thought it was actually a culturally incredibly profound and important movie. Like, this is a movie, and because when the first Wonder Woman came out, I thought, well, this is great, but this is kind of women stepping into the patriarchal paradigm, right? She solves all her problems with incredible violence, and she just kills the bad guy, and the bad guy's a bad guy, and she's the good woman. And we're just seeing Superman, as a woman. And it's almost like that idea was floating around in the zeitgeist, and then a bunch of women got together and made a movie that's actually the superhero movie that I'm wishing somebody would make, where the villains are actually, you explain how they fell into a toxic thought form, and it exposes the nature of patriarchy being so like, I'm a separate being, and so I need to have what I want. And if we're all just like these separate beings having what we want, and that's the big evil in the world. And she solves all her problems and uses her superpowers, but she somehow miraculously doesn't kill anybody. She's just always compassionately lassoing people. It's brilliant in that regard, and you could say it's a facile thing, but to me it's subversive, and it's actually presenting like the death of patriarchy, that movie. And I almost want to see it again after having that insight. So all this to say that,
not co-signing onto that, Dan Mackenzie. I'm not co-signing off that, Dan Mackenzie. She had 2 decades of pining after a dude in that movie. Come on.
Well, yeah, but that's what I love. But listen, she does realize, look, it's not perfect, but let's not be overly corrective, because I think I'm going to call you out on this. This is the toxic element of the left, which is, it's never quite correct enough. And I'm part of the left, so I say this. At least there's a decision made in that movie, to your point, where she recognizes that her own selfish interest and her romanticized love is not as important as the collective good in the world, and that it's a something that's a pleasant thing that humans experience, but she can't make her decisions based on that, and she lets him go. I hate to be such a spoiler of the movie, of this great movie, but don't you recognize something in this movie?
He saved her in like every scene. That dude saved her.
If I have to watch Wonder Woman again, 84 to be an enlightened male, then that's where I go.
Thank you, David.
So
speakers unite.
That is a terrible movie.
What?
I'm going to say something really confusing, Dan, and say,
okay.
Because I don't think it's a call-out culture problem. I think it's just a personal grounding in the fact that Wonder Woman 2 made me lose my boner for Wonder Woman 1. And I know in the patriarchal, in holding this space, I thought that was the right amount of oxymoronic language.
So much, I feel like we should have another episode. I feel like we should do another episode on Wonder Woman. And that kind of like, that's interesting. That's interesting to me that you liked it, because I thought Wonder Woman 1 was a better movie, but the message of it, if we're really talking about culturally valuable, progressive messages, Wonder Woman 2, it's like through the roof. I just think the dialogue wasn't as good, and maybe the way it was laid out wasn't that good. But to me,
I like the origin story thing with the villain. That's okay. That's good.
Yeah, just I mean, neither of you are going to watch it again, clearly, but I would defy you
My
to.
God.
Because I think that movie historically, in the future, people will look back on Wonder Woman 3, just as we're looking back on Idiocracy, which I loved in the beginning, and say, you know what, there was something, a profound shift that happened in this populist saga, because it's challenging to make a superhero movie that's not laden with hyper-masculine tropes of just using violence to conquer the other, which is the bad. And it did a wonderful, I don't know if anyone actually died in this movie. I believe I observed that nobody was actually intentionally killed, which is not an insignificant achievement. And what I'm taking away a little bit from you two is that maybe there's a communal desensitization to violence as a manifestation of toxic
So
masculinity.
just to sum up, when we get to the true enlightenment and
David, I got to interrupt because I think you're not coming through, man. Am I the only person that can't hear what he's saying?
overcome patriarchy, and we are true feminists, you know.
David,
men and
David.
women, and we're all
David.
we've achieved nirvana. We're moving. Sorry, you
David,
can't hear me?
Yeah, no, this is instant karma.
Hey,
Whatever you just had to share, particularly if you were disagreeing with me, the powers that be have arranged for it not to be heard because you were completely gone.
all right.
Anyway, I think we have to wrap it up. Pretty soon. I don't know who's talking there. David, just stop. I think it's not working. Maybe you can type your comments. We'll read them out loud in the chat. I so appreciate you being here, but you're lost, I think. But does anyone else, you know,
Okay.
it's a weird, Wonder Woman is an interesting note to end on. I really want to express my appreciation for both Megan and David and for everyone who showed up to either listen or participate. Does anyone else have anything they want to throw out there? Is there a topic that anyone would like to see us address in these sort of Omega Male sessions? Does anyone have any final words that don't involve bashing Wonder Woman 84, my new favorite movie?
I have one thing perhaps just to kind of think about as we move forward, and that is sort of the what does allyship look like? You know, as someone who I made a sort of a feminist movie a few years ago, and that's actually what brought me into men's work. Was like, wait a second, I'm a man, white man. Like, where am I putting my energy? How do I actually be an ally and also not be like, hey, I'm going to start this amazing thing for someone else, but actually how do I perhaps be a support? How do I come from underneath, be a support, not the face of, and you know, just these bigger questions of, you know, as a man, as a white man, do I kind of go and work with other men and white men? Or I think that's a big question, is how to be a good ally in the race and gender question. So I think I'm just going to throw that out there.
Great question.
Yeah.
I'm
Hey,
dropping
Dan.
a link again. I'm dropping a link into the chat again, Matthew. You should check out.
I saw it. I pulled it up actually, but
Great.
I will. Thank you for that.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah, dude.
Yo. So if I had to guess, most of the lovely people in this room buy into the concept of the Omega Man. I would throw out that the guy with his feet up on the desk is the guy that probably needs to be reached more with these concepts. And when I hear words like male privilege and toxic masculinity used pretty casually, I wonder how effective we are reaching people in that spot. And I think David was speaking to this earlier. Like, how do you reach people that might feel and believe such different things? And I'm concerned that those terms might keep people from coming into the fold and having conversations like this. I'm equally concerned when I hear people talking about the environment. The minute I hear global warming, half the population doesn't want to hear anything about it. And so I wonder, if you were to talk about clean air, clean water, and clean food instead, is that somewhere that we could agree on without having to use the words global warming or climate change, because those have become politicized. And I feel very similarly with some of the terms that we're speaking of. And I don't know that I have the replacement terms for these, but with toxic masculinity, every time I hear that term, I wonder, first of all, what is it? Second of all, what is its opposite, which would be toxic femininity? How is that defined? And third of all, is it toxic masculinity, or is it just an asshole? And so I'm always looking at how to bring people into the fold that think very different things to me. So in your quest to get ideas out about the omega male, I would encourage you to keep that guy in mind with his feet up on the desk in Nancy Pelosi's office, because I think that's the guy that really needs to be reached.
Amen, brother. I thank you so much for sharing that and coming in out of left field. And I'm endeavoring to do that. I think the concept of omega male is a positive view of what we can strive for, as opposed to a negative view of what we can condemn. And I do sometimes use those terms, and I'm trying to figure out how not to, and also in what context. Of course, in every different conversation, you know, my feeling is I don't speak to every person the same way. And so I try to use terms based on what my audience is and what my conversation partner is. But to your point, you're right. Even my dad, if I say the word male privilege, he just turns off. He doesn't even want, he just laughs. So I feel you, you know, it's not just the guy with the feet up on his desk. It could be your brother or your dad or your friend. A lot of my friends don't like those things. And so it was I was hesitant to even, you know, make a topic patriarchy and male privilege and feminism. And yet there's another part of me that wants to not support the culture of being triggered on both sides, like both sides and all sides of every issue. There's so much, I can't handle this word. So yeah, it's a dual thing with how can I use different words, or how can I engage in a conversation where if I talk to that guy, at the end of the conversation, he might go, yeah, that is kind of toxic, you know? So big questions, but thank you for raising that, because that is a big challenge for me within this. And you've stated it very eloquently. It's part of the job. Anyone else before we land the plane here want to chime in? David, you're looking, if we establish that you can speak intelligibly?
If you can hear me, I'd say something. Can you hear me?
I can right now, but if I go like this, that means we lost you.
Okay. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've been fascinated by everything, and that's why I stayed so quiet. But I do think, to me, the most profound thing to try to sum up is to hear you, Dan, talk about all the inner work that you're doing. And I think that there's almost a dark irony to you working so hard on yourself, and also reaching out to so many other people who I hope I'm one of, who are also, we are introspective. We do inner work. We are open. We want that list that you came up with, which I don't know where it came from, but it was a great list. But all that missing the point? I mean, it's all great for us. And yeah, we can't spread, we can't spread enlightenment unless we are ourselves enlightened, I guess is a crude way to put it. But all this inner work for people who are already introspective, right now in this environment, I don't know, I want to bang my head against the wall, because I just feel like I have plenty of faults, and I know you, Dan, have plenty of faults and all that, but we're good guys. We're trying to do the right thing. And there are just so many people who are just, their minds are closed. And I mean, closed. And that's really the problem. That's the problem. So I'll shut up.
Well, getting the final word as I'm allowed to, because it's my ball. I hear what you're saying. I don't think that inner work and introspection are the same thing. And when I talk about inner work, I'm talking about real meditative, conscious work. And maybe I'm sort of glossing over it here in a way that's not conveying what I'm talking about. Because just thinking about stuff isn't, to me, inner work. Like really, some of the examples I gave, I'm talking about a level of work where in a deep state of meditation, you actually can rise out of the perspective of your ego into a higher I am consciousness. And the reason it's important, David, is because those people are not doing that work. It's just like when you're in an argument with someone and you're right, and you know you're right, and they think they're right, and you can either just argue with them, but very often it's the person who is more spiritually evolved. We call it taking the high road, right? Who has to sort of take a step back or listen or concede or wait or try to take the other person's perspective. Even if you're right, sometimes the capacity to do that is what brings peace in the end. And that's what I'm talking about, the ability to cultivate, because you're certainly, if you're just going to keep pointing at these people and their inability to come around to your brilliant ideas, yes, you are just treading water, if that's what you're doing. And you can't fight fire with fire. I'm trying to provide the water to fight the fire with. And so the more inner transformation we have, we grow in our capacity to actually make peace with people. And this is not just me sitting here meditating alone. I think in my life, I can say that I meet people from other sides of political spectrums and whatnot, and I'm able to have conversations with them, with some of them anyway, where we come to common ground. I mean, I briefly referred to the conversation I had with my cousin who's a policeman, and I have great love and respect for, and we genuinely came to a common ground that we were on opposite sides of when we were in the midst of the BLM and police riots. So it's possible and it's real, and I stand by it. And thanks for joining me. Anyone else? Christina, you want to sort of shut this thing down? Any of you WeDeepen people? Does anyone have any last?
Definitely. Such a great experience, everyone. Thank you for joining. I think this was the third or fourth Omega Male. The fourth, the next one we have scheduled is Wednesday, February 13th. So Omega Male is happening the second Wednesday monthly. So please tune in, come back and join us again. Right now, you should in your inbox have a survey. And it's a quick survey. It'll take you 3 to 4 minutes to give us feedback on Omega Male. Appreciate if you take a moment as you're exiting this event while the thoughts are fresh to complete that survey and to help us create the most effective experience for you, that we continue to learn from each experience and hear your feedback on it. So it's super helpful if you complete that survey. Also, many of you guys may have heard of this new app that's become very popular called Clubhouse. We are on Clubhouse daily in a room from 1 to 2 Pacific Standard Time or 4 to 5 Eastern Standard Time. I'm here in Maryland, in Annapolis, and I know many of you guys are tuning in from Los Angeles. So we reach both time zones. So please tune in and join us daily. It's a different topic, and it's a good way to deepen further into community. I also dropped a Facebook group link into the chat. Join us in the Facebook chat. Come check out more experiences. Next Wednesday is the Great Love Debate, guided by Brian Howie. It's an interactive show that reality stars come in and talk about their dating lives. And we discussed why is everyone still single? It's more of a fun comedy-like show. And then the following Wednesday is another edition of Yes and, where we pose controversial and challenging questions that challenge the status quo. And the upcoming question is, are gender roles necessary to keep society intact? So tune in for that one. We'd love to hear your voice and your thoughts on that. You can check out the rest of the experiences. They're listed at WeDeepen.com. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We appreciate this, and come back and join us. Let's be together and to continue to deepen further into these conversations. And
Thank
Kelly's
you.
going to send us out with some music. And thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, David, Megan, all of you for coming. Please come again.